Hello, I'm Peter Laws and welcome to the Flicks the Church Forgot, the show where I explore the deeper and sometimes spiritual themes of horror movies. Now this is the video version of the show, but if you'd rather not stare at my face all the time, then I also provide an audio rip of this podcast and you can check that out through the website. Now remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws or join the Facebook page at the Flicks the Church Forgot or visit the website for the central hub of all things spooky and spiritual, theflicksthechurchforgot.com. By the way, I recently lost my voice, hence the slight croak you might be able to hear, but I'll battle through, and if for some reason you see me grab my throat, wince and keel over, I've either succumbed to the virus in my throat right now, or I've been stabbed by one of the evil twins from Blood Rage. In Australia in 1991, a teenager called Daryl John Phillips stabbed a woman, and an article at the time blamed the crime on the fact that he had just watched a film called Nightmare at Shadow Woods, which is also known as Blood Rage. This is what the criminal justice in the court said about the film. It's not easy to absolve a system which allows such a violent and unmeritorious film as Nightmare at Shadow Woods to be viewed indiscriminately by members of the community regardless of their underlying problems and susceptibilities. It was a film with no discernible artistic merit at all. As far as I could see, it was nothing more than a vehicle for depicting gratuitous, mindless, and ghoulish violence. So what was this movie? Was it really so bad, and might there be more to it than just mindless, ghoulish violence? Well, join me as I find out this evening as I look at a little scene horror movie called Blood Rage. Blood Rage is a bizarre slasher movie on steroids. It's not that well known, but many of the people who've seen it do not really act in the same way as that criminal justice did in the Daryl Phillips case. Many, in fact, see this film more as not dangerous at all, but rather as a terrible, terrible slasher movie. I had a quick gander at the comments online about the film, and these sorts of words come up. Horrible, inane, appalling. One YouTube commentator said, "Wow, I never thought that a slasher movie from the 80s that's this bad was even possible." So what about me? Well, let me make this simple and clear. Blood Rage is an absolute blast, and before you accuse me of having some sort of brain injury, bear in mind that I am not alone. The good folks at Arrow Video reckon that this is a decent enough film too, because they have just released a lovingly restored 3-disc Blu Ray set, no less, which is apparently coming out both in the UK but also in the US for Thanksgiving. Now, don't kick yourself if you've never heard of Blood Rage. The film has had quite a messy release slate, so much so that even uber horror fan Eli Roth doesn't even seem to have heard of it. Say what you like about Eli Roth, but he does seem to have a solid, knowledgeable awareness of horror movies, but I'm sure that once in an interview he said that there were no movies set around Thanksgiving, horror movies that is. Well, there's more than one in fact, but one of them, the most prominent in my mind, is Blood Rage. Now, the film was made in 1983, but it came a little bit late to the genre party. The slasher movie craze had peaked already and was falling out of favour, so the film sat on a shelf for 4 years until 1987, where it got a limited release under the new title Nightmare at Shadow Woods. Now, why call it that? Well, it's obvious, I guess. Nightmare on Elm Street had just hit the cinemas a few years earlier in 1984, late then in November, and it went on to be a massive worldwide hit, so shoving the word nightmare in the title was to capitalise on that. Then in the same year, 1987, the film also came out from Prison Video under the better title, Blood Rage. And to make things even more confusing, when I actually watched Blood Rage the other night, the title card said it was called Slasher. It's also connected with the title Complex as well. Also, there's another film from 1979 that you can mix it up with called Blood Rage. Confused? Well, you don't have to be, because Arrow have sifted through the vaults and thrown basically all the different versions together, the cut, the uncut, the extra footage versions, and have gently set them onto these 3 delightful, wacky 3-disc DVD Blu-ray sets. Now, on paper, Blood Rage sounds like 100 other films that aped John Carpenter's Halloween. For example, the opening scene particularly, you'll see that there where a young psycho boy is committing murder, and then after a lingering shot of his creepy post-kill scare, we cut to 10 years later Now the kid's all grown up, and guess what? He's escaped from his institution, and you'll never guess what else is happening. He's coming back home to his hometown, and the bodies are starting to pile up. The only difference, really, between this setup and Carpenter's Halloween in some ways is that Blood Rage gives the killer a twin brother, and it's not set during Halloween, it's set during Thanksgiving. The filmmakers really should have taken more advantage of the fact that this film was set at Thanksgiving. If I'd worked on the marketing for this, I'd have skipped Blood Rage and Slasher altogether, and I would have called it Thanksgiving or something similarly silly. Maybe I think it would have stuck in the mind more if they'd melded it onto that particular season. But anyway, at least the Thanksgiving angles in Blood Rage does give the film its most quotable line. The killer sometimes looks at the blood he's spilt, and when he sees it, he frequently says, "It's not cranberry sauce." Now, I defy you not to say that out loud at some point after watching this film. So yes, the film's setup is as generic as they come. But that's only what makes it even more impressive when Blood Rage manages to elevate itself to become something quite cool, something a little different, something I thoroughly enjoyed. I think a lot of this has to do with the film having such a mad sense of energy and enthusiasm. Everything is in fifth gear, even the gore. Ed French was the makeup designer on this, and he would go on to become nominated for an Oscar. These days he works on big budget movies and high profile TV shows like House of Cards. But back here, in the early 80s, he's delivering the horror effects. He does make sure that they have a hardcore edge to them. We get hand chops, severed legs, skulls cracking open with glistening brains beneath. French seems like he's on a pretty steady quest to outdo himself with each successive kill. Plus, I think there's quite a lot of imagination in his approach and ambition too. So a hand chopped off doesn't just fall to the floor, it keeps on crushing the beer can that it was holding. Machetes don't just get plunged into people, but we see them slowly being pulled out. It's quite grim, but quite inventive. A woman's severed legs don't just get sliced off, but they keep on running even without their body attached. Now, that effect actually never made the final cut of the film, but it's what French had wanted, he says in the extras, and I just think it's indicative of the creativity that he was throwing at these effects, rather than just dialing in yet another axe to the head. True, the actors that French makes up don't always play dead that well. You see them breathing, you see them flickering their eyelids a bit when they're supposed to keep them shut. But there is enough nastiness to the gore to make the film tick the boxes for the slasher crowd, and indeed to worry the criminal justices of Australia. Now, Blood Rage, it doesn't just rip off Halloween's story structure, it actually tries to amplify it. It tries to extend it as much as possible. In other words, while Halloween was a tight, efficient thrill machine, Blood Rage is an over-the-top melodrama. But it's linking good fun seeing someone do such a high-octane version of Halloween. For example, at the start of Halloween, we get a tense, but in some ways quite tasteful first kill when Michael kills his sister. It's a classic chilling scene, and the look on Michael's face afterwards as the camera pulls back and rises is a perfect setup for that movie. Here, though, we don't just get one kid, we get two. We get twin brothers, no less, Todd and Terry. They're in the back of their parents' car at a drive-in, and they're lying under a blanket, which for some bizarre reason has a shotgun draped across their knees, or one of their knees. I'm not sure why that's there, but if I was writing some sort of snooty academic paper on Blood Rage, I'd make the point that maybe this is a nifty symbol of how these kids, or at least one of these kids, has always been under, both literally and figuratively, the influence of a violent father figure. Which would end up having dire consequences for one of these brothers, but maybe it's just there because it looks cool. Anyway, who knows why the heck the gun is there, but I noticed that straight away. The main thing, though, is that the dad is trying to get romantic with the mum in the front seat, and she's not so keen. The two kids in the back are not keen either to see their parents getting jiggy with it, and so they slip out and wander around the cars to find something else to do. But they find another couple fully naked. In fact, loads of people are really getting it on in this cinema, the drive-in, sorry. And so one of the kids, and I won't tell you which, pulls out an axe and he randomly chops one of them up. Basically slices hard into this guy's face, and there is no subtlety like you see in Halloween. It's more Friday the 13th territory, but it's really quite effective. The makeup effect that French came up with, the guy's facial wounds spurting blood in a decent enough blood color, is quite impressive. Afterwards, people gather round, horrified at this homicidal kid, but the boy isn't just staring into space like Michael Myers did. When he's doing the crime, actually, he's utterly transfixed by the corpse he's creating, and you can't even hear what people are saying. Really, he's just in the zone with the murder. You know, that look, that magical look of awe that you and I had when we saw E.T. fly Elliot's BMX past the moon. Well, that's what this kid's like when he's murdering someone, only it's a spurting face wound that seems to do it. So yeah, he's definitely a psychopath. Anyway, some viewers are going to look at all this and think, what a ridiculously over-the-top rip-off of a classy Halloween opening scene. And yeah, I get that. But for me, though, if you go with this film's logic and its sensibility, it's actually pretty bloody disturbing, that scene. The young kid slaughters some guy and then he's hypnotized by it, and afterwards, you know, anyway, I won't give anything away, but the film flashes forward 10 years and the killer is now an adult, but isn't like a masked enigma like Michael Myers was. He's like this jolly thigh-slapping youth. Both twins are played by Mark Soper, and he does a pretty decent job of each. Though the scenes where we see them in the same shot could have used a bit more effort. I mean, in some shots, the stand-in for the other twin isn't even wearing the same coloured wig. Maybe that's the HD that shows that up. Anyway, Soper plays the institutionalized brother as highly strung mental patient and straggly hair, but the other brother as a sort of semi-cool but nerdy in-betweener. What's interesting is that the killer certainly hasn't got a rampant lust for violence, but what's really noticeable is that he doesn't seem to have any interest in sex. In fact, it's the opposite. I think that might be the problem. Sex disturbs the killer in this so much that it drives him to violence. After all, in the car at the start, he's prompted to make this first kill after seeing his parents getting intimate in the front seat. And so he goes out and he finds another couple having sex and makes it stop. And you get the sense that this young kid is walking around thinking, why is everybody having sex with each other? It's disturbing. What is wrong with this world? Maybe I can fix it. And then actually, it's interesting, as an adult, we see this exact same thing happening again later in the film. There's a scene where a naked couple are making out, making love in the swimming pool, and in walks the killer, and he's like, hey, stop that! And they're doing something wrong. And then he slices them up, and, you know, well, you can imagine what happens next. He walks around this movie basically carving people up in his retro armless t-shirt, and he's laughing while he's doing it. All this to an up-tempo synth soundtrack that would have worked very well, would have worked perfectly in an 80s exercise workout video. Now, it's these sorts of stylistic choices that I really got a kick out of. It makes the film feel different to countless other slasher ripoffs, but I think these are precisely the things that have annoyed and disgusted some reviewers. They say that the music, for example, is ridiculous, that the drama lacks all tension. I don't agree. They say there's no subtlety in this. Actually, there is some subtlety in this. You just have to look hard for it. They say the story makes little sense. Well, it is a bit wild, but there's a pretty decent giallo-style thriller logic going on in the basic story. They say it's all just way over the top. Well, yeah, it is way over the top. I agree with them on that. But I like that it's way over the top. That works for me. Which brings me to Louise Lasser, who plays the killer's mother, Maddie. A really crazy character, and I think it's her that really pushes blood rage into the memory banks. Now, in the UK, Lasser isn't really that well known, but US audiences of a certain age at least, or at least people who are going to know their retro TV, will know that she was actually a fairly prominent TV personality cropping up on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, among others. She also worked with Woody Allen on some of his early films, but she's most famous for playing the lead in a clever TV show called Mary Hartman, Mary Hartman. That was a parody of soap operas where it basically was very popular at the time. A book was even written about Lasser called Louise Lasser in 1976. So anyway, she comes to this wild project Blood Rage with some acting kudos. She has pedigree. And what I love about her is also what many people hated about her performance, and it's basically that she takes the role in Blood Rage deadly seriously. She could have easily played this for laughs or with a sly wink to the camera, like she knew this was the sort of low-budget trash, but she doesn't. She plays a mum that's constantly on the edge of a nervous breakdown, and she plays that part as straight and sometimes very cranked up drama. So much so that someone commented on YouTube like this. They said, that lady who played the mom really should have taken it down a few levels. It was like she treated every scene like a potential Oscar clip. I do know what that guy means. Like, she really is earnest in this, really over the top, but that, oddly enough, I think is one of the reasons why her performance is one of the greatest things about Blood Rage. You've got this high-octane, pulpy action going on anyway, Like I said, everything in the film is pumped to the absolute max, and so it kind of makes sense that the acting should follow the same route. Lasser even admits herself in the extras on the Arrow discs that her scenes, or some of her scenes, are really overacted. Like, for example, there's a bit where she's making a phone call trying to track down her fiance, but she's really worried when he isn't answering, and she just keeps saying, "Operator, this is serious. This is an emergency. It's serious. It's serious. It's really, really serious." And she's saying all this in her characteristic raspy voice. She says it's overacting, but I think it was great. I love this performance. You see, Lasser doesn't just do intensity. She's also very inventive too. She throws little quirks of the character that makes it all the more odd and intriguing. Like the outfits that she wears and the way she styles her hair, which apparently was Lasser's idea, are freaky in itself. She almost dresses like she's a little girl, which I think is actually important for her character. But she does weird things as well. Like at one point she sits on the kitchen floor in front of the fridge and munches away at the Thanksgiving leftovers, and she does it in a gentle but sort of primitive way, which is really left field. She staggers through this entire movie pretty much constantly heartbroken at what's happening, but you can see her really trying hard to make the best of it. There's a scene at the Thanksgiving dinner when friends are around, and her and her son are in the kitchen when they find out that the other son's escaped from the mental institution, and the mum can't call it an institution. She calls it his school, which in itself is a sweet and tragic insight into her character. This woman is in denial. When she finds out that the son has escaped, she says to her other son that they mustn't tell anybody at the dinner table. It's Thanksgiving, let's just stay happy. So they walk back in, and within seconds the son raises his glass and says something like, "Well, here's to my brother, who's you'll all be meeting soon because he's just broken out and he's coming here." The look on Lasser's face is perfect. It's like betrayal and confusion and sadness. She portrays it all really well. So Lasser's performance is over the top at times, but it's also quirky, funny and touching. And at times, though, I really think it was quite a disturbing performance. You see the best of that in the end of the film. I won't give anything away, but the way this film wraps up left me with a far more of a psychological punch than I expected. And again, it's Lasser who left me with that final sense of unease. Which brings us, I suppose, to the deeper themes of Blood Rage. The film isn't just about a young man jumpy about sex who murders people, though you could read it that way, certainly. I think the really lasting storyline is about a mother who was desperate to have a normal, functional family. So desperate that she's quite willing to deny reality to keep things nice and to keep things neat. We see little symbols of that in the movie. Like when she first finds out that her son's escaped, her first thought is to fix up the house, to make it look nice. She needs to make things tidy and clean. That will somehow sort things out. Later on in the film, in the midst of all this craziness, she still finds it important to tell her son to put a sweater on, and he nods and walks off, and she's like, "The blue one." You know, she wants things in a particular order around her, which explains, I think, how much she's almost constantly falling apart, because reality never seems to reflect her hopes of what life could be like. Her family isn't functional in the slightest, quite the contrary. I think this is something we all do. We want to see our lives fitting into a sort of predetermined narrative, whether it's having a happy family or a decent job, or maybe our lives are purely about having a fantastic social life with decent friends and a constant engagements with other people that makes us feel like we're living life in all its fullness. And we try our best to live up to these lives we set up for ourselves, and then we panic when we realize that reality isn't shaping up in the way we'd hoped. Our families aren't perfect. Our job might not be what we always dreamed of. In fact, it might be the sort of thing we'd have refused to have done in the wide-eyed days of our youth. Our life might not be a steady stream of wonderful social experiences, but actually might be frequently monotonous or lonely. Or maybe life for us gets really difficult and messed up, and we keep on pretending that we can have perfection until actually the cracks break through everything and we sort of fall apart. Lasser plays a mother who gradually is realizing that what she's always wanted, a solid, healthy set of children, is a complete joke. Other mums might get to have that. In the film, she realizes she'll never have that. And if we left it there, we could say that Lasser was a tragic figure of motherhood who's just trying her best in a messed up situation. But that's where the film takes things even a little further, because we start to learn that mothers may love their children, but they can sometimes love one child more than the other. And that, the film says, can have a devastating effect on a child growing up. The last few minutes of this might seem a little over the top, well, very over the top dramatically, but they still left me with a chill. In the end, we're left thinking that Lasser is a victim in all this, but she's also partly to blame for all this psychosis that is tearing her ideal world apart, ironically. Now, Blood Rage is not going to suit everybody, and there'll be people out there who might well think that I'm crazy or nuts for being so enthusiastic about it, that its formulaic concept and its frantic execution is embarrassing and amateur. And I do understand why people might view it that way, but I really think there's a creative mania here that's rarely seen in rip-off movies. Perhaps one of the reasons why Blood Rage didn't make much of an impact at the time isn't because it was a bad film per se, but maybe because it was different, or it was a little too unique, a little too left of center, that it wasn't, after all, the Halloween and the Friday the 13th parallels in the end that did it. It was that it wasn't generic enough, so it got forgotten. For me, though, that's precisely what makes Blood Rage worth discovering, a rip-off slasher film that ended up having a few wild ideas of its own. Now, Arrow's released this in a 3-disc DVD and Blu Ray set with 3 different versions of the film. There's the 2K restoration of the uncut home video version, there's Nightmare at Shadow Woods, which was the theatrical recut, and there's a bonus 3rd version which they call the composite cut, and this sort of combines those all together. Now, the picture quality does indeed have some grain in it at night time, but I just thought this was a pretty impressive transfer. I mean, considering this has only been ever out on murky VHS, the leap up in quality is clear. There's a commentary from the director, John Grisham, interviewed by Ewan Cant, and I think it's a shame he never did more work. This is, Blood Rage, I think, in one of the films, what he did. He should have done more. He went on to write novels, I think. Plus, there's a bunch of talking head interviews with people like Soper, who played the twins, and a great interview with Lasser herself, and also the producer of the film, Marianne Cantor. Even Ted Raimi gets a short little talking head interview, since he turns up at the start of this film in his first ever screen role. The makeup artist, Ed French, who I mentioned earlier, is really interesting. He's on here talking about his effects work in the film, and he's in the film itself in a cameo role, but he realized that he wasn't a very good actor and he never did a cameo role again, apparently. There's also a great little feature where a fan revisits the original locations, which I always enjoy. And there's a substantial set of outtakes that are presented in HD. This stuff has never been seen before. I'm really going to be interested to see what sort of response Arrow get from Blood Rage, particularly because it's opening and it's being released in both markets, England and America. It's hardly the sort of crowd pleaser like their Hellraiser set that they just released. So in some ways it might feel like a gamble putting this out. But as far as I'm concerned, they picked a very cool little film to showcase. It's bizarre and it's quirky, it's ridiculous and it's melodramatic, it's dated and it's silly, but it's also pumped up with creative energy and what seems like a giddy lack of restraint. That's what I like. It's got a lack of restraint. For the justice system in Australia, that was a signal of something evil, something bad. To the disappointed horror fans rolling their eyes, that was the sign of something amateurish and forgettable. But for a few of us weirdo trolls like me, the crazy world of Blood Rage leaves an odd sense of delight. So while we're on the theme of Thanksgiving, clink your glasses. Well, I've got water. Clink your glasses to the cult labels who keep on giving forgotten films like this such a wild and twisted kudos. Cheers. Now, pass me the cranberry sauce. Well, that's it for the Flicks the Church Forgot. Thanks for listening. Do subscribe to me on the YouTube channel or the podcast. Follow me at Twitter at Rev Peter Laws. I read my monthly horror column in the 14 Times print magazine. But until next time, stay thankful, stay scared, and don't forget, the Flicks the Church Forgot.